Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland, Majority Report. Pleasure to welcome back to the program Krystal Ball, co-host of Breaking Points, as well as Krystal, Kyle, and friends. Krystal, welcome back.
Always a pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me.
Great to see you.
So it's just, this story just broke this morning that a county judge in Wisconsin was arrested by the FBI for allegedly protecting an immigrant in her courthouse. Now, it has been very controversial, or at least it certainly was 8 years ago, the idea of not arresting immigrants, undocumented immigrants, or anybody else for that matter, in like courthouses. There's been a couple of places because you want people to be able to go to courthouses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There is a societal interest. I mean, this is why we have, why we give undocumented in some states licenses. This is why we don't allow local police in many places to engage in immigration sweeps, because if you have a portion of your population that is not participating in things like reporting a fire or reporting a crime or going in and adjudicating something, your society is starting to break down a little bit. But arresting a judge seems maybe like an important moment.
Yeah, it's a significant escalation. I don't think there's any doubt about it. And I don't know if you guys probably saw this footage that came out of a courtroom in Charlottesville, Virginia, where an immigrant had just actually had his charges dropped. And then agents of the state who would not identify themselves, would not show a warrant, one of whom was fully masked, apprehended him and pulled him out, even as his lawyers and other bystanders are trying to protect him, trying to say, who are you with? What's your name? What's your badge number? And so those sorts of things have been playing out around the country. And we don't know all the details here yet. But I mean, one thing that was interesting to note is that the FBI director, Kash Patel, he's the one who originally posted this tweet saying that they had arrested this judge. He then deleted the tweet. So not sure what is going on there. But, zooming out, I've been saying, and this won't be any surprise to you guys, as Trump becomes less popular, we're going to enter an even more dangerous phase of this presidency, because rather than, being able to try to garner any sort of public political support, he's going to have to engage in increasingly ever more authoritarian and fascistic tactics. And I think this could be seen as part of that ramping up. And it's not an accident that it comes as his poll numbers across the board, including on things like immigration, really fall.
Yeah, and also I think it's a way to send a message to immigration judges too, or not immigration judges, but judges across the country, I should say. And it doesn't have to just be limited to immigration, but this is how the mafia operates, right? Where they're intimidating this woman, this judge in Wisconsin, and they're trying to make an example out of her so that other judges across the country are maybe a little bit more favorable to the administration, because that's basically where the only thing that has the brakes on this administration so far has been the court system and the judiciary.
Yeah. And, there was one piece of good news. I don't know if you guys saw this, but the Trump administration has just been mass canceling the immigration status of foreign students. And they were facing an overwhelming onslaught, some 50 plus lawsuits across the country that they were just losing one after another after another. And they actually backed down on that and are reinstating the status of these foreign students. So you're absolutely right that even though they've been willing to, outright defy the courts, to, misinterpret what the Supreme Court is saying, what district court judges are saying, et cetera, it still is the only place where you've had a sort of meaningful, organized resistance. And it was interesting to me. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to read the Time Magazine interview with Trump, which was all over the map. But they asked him about the Supreme Court unanimous decision with regard to, hey, you got to facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. And Trump, first of all, claimed that his people, didn't tell him that ruling went against him. But he wanted to make it clear that he did not want to defy the Supreme Court. Now, in reality, they are defying the Supreme Court. But it's at least interesting to me that he doesn't want to be seen as brazenly, like directly defying the Supreme Court, and at least wants to put some rhetorical flourish on the direction they're going in.
I mean, I believe him that they didn't tell. We saw there was footage that came out with Stephen Miller. It was like, we won hands down, and I'm not convinced that wasn't the first time that he heard that. But I think like what is really clear that and I think the poll numbers are part of this. We should say that I think it's the first time that he is net negative now on immigration, only by a point or two. He's net negative
every other
by
issue.
Dozens of points on just about every other issue. I mean, well into the teens in a lot of this, and sometimes even further a net negative. But I think what we're going to start to see is the pace and the ambition of different parts of what was the overall agenda move at a different pace and start. And there's going to be, it's unclear to me, like it's quite obvious that Stephen Miller, and I think you can see that in the context of the Hegseth signal chat, or maybe the first one with the First Atlantic, where it's like Miller comes in and he's the guy who has the last word.
He's the voice of the president
on attacking Yemen.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's sort of outside of his portfolio. I mean, granted, they're not white people that we're attacking, so maybe that's why he has a say in that.
Yeah, his portfolio is just evil doing
against
evil doing. That's
non-white
Stephen
people.
Miller.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
But this, I mean, I can't help but think like we're going to start to see different agendas in how they're represented by different people within the Trump administration, because Trump is quite clearly just like he's so far removed from all of this, it seems to me, at this point.
I think the only area that I would say he's not far removed from is the tariffs. That seems to be like the part that
totally his.
Yeah, that's what he's into. He's making these insane decisions. He's inventing calls that he didn't even have with the Chinese leadership. Like, I think that's all him. But I think you're right.
200 deals on the
That's
table.
That's right, 200
right
deals.
now.
What could you tell us about any of them? No. No.
I can't reveal. I can't reveal that. I should also announce that I personally have made 300 tariff deals.
Wow. Congratulations, Sam. Well, I just got off the phone with President Xi. He's doing great. And we also made the roughly 3,000 deals together. So
it's a mistake to say who the deals are.
You revealed too much.
You're learning, but I do think that like we're going to start to see that, because the Doge stuff has now it seems to me fallen away, and they've fallen back to their sort of like Alamo position, which is the Russell vote mechanism of destroying the administrative state. Mm-hmm. It's all, we had someone on the other day who was a former Doge, and just because she was with the U.S. Digital Services, and she said this next wave is all RIF stuff, reduction in force, which actually is a mechanism rather than the Doge, which was just go in and fire people.
Yeah. And hack into systems and
exactly
that sort of thing. Yeah.
And which is not to say that it's any better. In some ways, it's even worse, because it's like they've mapped this out of how they're going to do it from a legal standpoint. But it feels like the tariff stuff, like you say, is Trump's baby, but it's fallen apart for him now. Like it's as if Peter Navarro didn't know what he was talking about.
Can you imagine that?
He's getting warnings now. Like I have there's a half a dozen stories that are out there today of like, he was surprised that all these shipping containers from China, basically, they're not sending stuff. Like they decided it's just not worth it.
Right.
Whereas
did you
he
see
was under the impression he was just going to make a lot of money as they come in.
Yeah.
Did you see the Jeff Stein report that now they're meeting about these rare earth metals?
Yes.
They're like, oh shit, like China cut those off. That was the most obvious, tactic China would take. It's like, you didn't think about this? This didn't occur to you before now? I mean, not that surprises me, because all of this attempt to sanewash him, or, oh, actually, you don't understand the grand plan and the 4D chess and the treasury bonds and the de-dollarization. We're going to use a stable coin to, be able to prop up the dollar, whatever. That was not what was going on. Trump likes tariffs because he likes power. He likes to be put in the position of having these people come to him and have to ask for what they want and him being able to bully him. He likes that. And so that's what he likes about tariffs. Now, I think other people in the administration had different ideas of what this was going to be about, whether it's, oh, we're going to bring the manufacturing jobs back, whether it's, oh, we're going to try to get the treasury yields down, which that completely and utterly failed. There were some Chamber of Commerce types that were like, we're going to use the threat of tariffs to actually get to 0% tariffs, which, is like, okay, well, then you could have just stayed in TPP, I guess, if that was ultimately your goal. But for Trump, I think it really comes down to vibes and control and power. And I also think that truly the connective tissue, and this gets to, some of the comments in the Democratic Party about oligarchy, et cetera, truly the connective tissue between all of these things is just an all-out assault on the working class. Tariffs are deeply regressive. They've been feeding insider info to close, Wall Street executives, et cetera, who can benefit from these massive market movements. They're going to give a huge tax cut to the rich. DOGE is all about destroying the government's ability to regulate so that business can treat workers however the hell they want, and so that you have no access to social safety net benefit programs, even if you technically are entitled to them. So, that to me is the most cohesive way of understanding an actual project here.
And the tariffs also, I think you're right that it's about him consolidating power and also wanting people to come to him so he can be the deal maker. Mm-hmm. But there's also the insane, almost conservative ideological thing that might be behind it, where he may be getting some backing from Looney Tune, like gold standard conservatives, like who think this is a way to basically eliminate the income tax.
Right.
That's a way that he talks about.
Right.
But he talks about McKinley and this era as a time waxing poetically about how there was no income tax at this time and how tariffs could be replacing that. I mean, that's not going to happen, right? Obviously, but I do think he thinks that way.
Yeah. Well, and not only was there no income tax at that time, there was next to no labor regulation at that time. Right. People who want to champion this policy, like the Batias of the world, want to evoke images of the 1953, like the peak of post-war manufacturing in America, when these were good, regulated union jobs by and large. Trump's not saying that. Trump's saying, hey, let's go back to the turn of the century and when we didn't have child labor laws to deal with, when, people, it was much more of a Dickensian type atmosphere. You're talking Upton Sinclair, The Jungle. You're talking Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. You're talking extremely low wages, extremely dangerous, extremely dirty. These were not good jobs. Trump wants to put American workers back in this, sweatshop era race to the bottom. He's not looking to rebuild some sort of working class power. Quite the opposite. And in that way, his interests with the tariffs are quite aligned with the interests of whether it's Elon Musk or any of the other, favored oligarchs.
It really also does feel like they did not understand the dynamic between China and us. I mean, it's as if it never occurred to them to say, what percentage of their exports are coming here? And that they didn't occur to them they might be able to make up that 12% other places. They can play hardball with us. I mean, on some level, it feels like Iraq, in many ways, the Iraq invasion and occupation, the U.S. invasion and occupation of Iraq, revealed the United States in many respects as a paper tiger. Mm-hmm. And it feels like this moment with the tariffs, regardless of if we go back to what the status quo was 6 months ago, is also now revealed the sort of that there's a bit of from an economic standpoint, we're a bit of a paper tiger because, you know, the idea of apparently Bloomberg reported that American meat exports, there was 12,000 metric tons of U.S. pork was ordered by Chinese. They canceled it. And Our system is just not prepared to absorb, like, who do we sell to?
Right.
And I think, like,
Australia doesn't want our meat. That's the thing that they were upset about. And it's because, no, they have plenty of cattle and beef. And also it's more regulated, so it's safer. So they don't want our dirty meat.
I would say too that, a preview of this was when we threw the entire economic sanctions playbook at Russia, thinking that would cause, severe economic contraction and potentially regime collapse within Russia. And, not going to say that it was nothing for them, but they were able to sustain that, to withstand that far better than most economists, but than any economist I saw expected. And, part of that is that Russia and China and the BRICS coalition in general, but specifically those two nations, they have recognized that their dependence on the U.S. and on our financial and banking system and these sorts of things, that this was a vulnerability for them. So they've been preparing. And so, China also had a little bit, I think, when we threw all of that at Russia, this incredible sanctions regime, that also helped them to game out what this could potentially look like for them.
And apparently, according to Financial Times, Beijing basically said, you got to cancel all your unilateral tariff measures before we even engage in trade talks. Like, I mean, they're basically saying, we're not sitting down with you unless you go back to zero. It is, it's going to be interesting to see, like, if Trump, I think there's probably like a 3-week window that we're already going to see some type of we're going to see the implications of this within 2 or 3 weeks, right? Like, however long the supply line sort of cycle was, however much slack there was in there, that's going to run out, and I think that's like basically the timeline. Yeah. If he doesn't do reverse by then, it's just going to get worse and worse for him, and for, frankly, farmers and other manufacturers, and it's all it's going to be a mess. And
manufacturing jobs, we just saw Intel, and I know that they've had problems for a while, but they're laying off 20% of their workforce. And you're seeing, like, I think it was the Richmond Fed of the 12 Fed districts was projecting incredible losses of manufacturing jobs in particular. So, like, this is gonna have an effect, and people are gonna feel that in real life. As Trump says, this is about bringing manufacturing back, and I wonder what the political implications are of that. Just because Trump has a he has a high floor. Like, I don't know if he gets down to 17% disapproval ever or something like that, because he has this cult following. But maybe that's what does it. Right? When we start to lose jobs and if the economy really gets into a deep recession. I don't know what you think about that, Krystal. But
I really don't know. To me, it's still an open question, because I think you're right to say we can't project what we've seen in the past about how high his floor is into this administration, because this administration is qualitatively different than what we saw in Trump 1.0. And also, typically, when leaders face some sort of a crisis and they have to manage it and it goes well or it goes poorly, usually there was some sort of an external factor that at least contributed to that crisis. The fact that this is wholly 100% self-generated is really an extraordinary thing. And Sam is exactly right. I've been digging into this, like, transport and logistics Twitter, like these guys that follow the trucking industry or that manage the ports and these sorts of things. And apparently, it takes about 30 days to get cargo from China to LA. That'll be the port where you first start to really see things hit. And then it's about 45 days to Houston, and then other places, the timing is a little bit different. But we're coming up on that. Now, one thing I'll say is that some of these businesses anticipated, they knew some sort of tariff regime was coming. They increased their inventory in anticipation of that. So that will, in the near term, give them a little bit more, wiggle room and a little bit more flexibility. But even if he completely walks back now, which is not happening yet, even if he completely walks away now, I think there's going to be a tremendous impact. And we all saw the way in COVID. You can't just snap your fingers and have these things go back to normal. There's going to be a massive impact from this. You had Walmart and Home Depot and CEOs of these companies go to Trump and say, hey, we're a couple weeks from having empty parts
Shelves.
of, shelves. Like this is getting very real. And if you're a small business owner, you don't have a cushion. You don't have a cushion. And maybe you thought, okay, maybe he's serious about 10 or 20% tariffs. Here's how I can plan. Here's how I can deal with that. When you get to 145%, like it's over, it's done. There's nothing you can do. There is no way you can withstand that. And so you'll see a number of small business bankruptcies. You'll see them getting wiped out. You're going to see prices going up. Amazon sellers are already hiking their prices now. Like that's what's really wild is we're in this sort of in-between period where we all know it's going to hit and it has not hit yet. And nobody knows exactly how severe that's going to be.
There's that, like, you can see the tide going out, and that's like, this is like with tsunami time, but we just don't know how much you have to run up the beach at this point to get to high ground. And I mean, I don't know in any other context I would ever even have this thought, but he's so he's so, I think, like mentally unpredictable. One wonders if, as he's getting hundreds of millions of dollars coming in with this meme coin thing, if he's going to fully sort of be able to wrap his head around or care about the implications of the
tariffs.
Of the tariffs. I mean, if Miller has been effective in shielding him from the idea that he's been basically telling his administration has been telling the Supreme Court, we're just not going to pay attention, building whatever sort of like, I think the Supreme Court at the end of the day wants to do what is consistent with, Republican and conservative ideology, but there's still some of that, like, wait, we're judges type of mentality. I wonder if he's not shielded from that. Like, I feel like we're one good critique of Besant away, where if like Navarro gets a line in, like, did you see the shirt he was wearing today? And Besant goes, and then Navarro's back into the Oval Office.
Totally.
And, because Musk is gone, I really do think this is sort of like,
it's the Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller seems like the shadow president, but then Navarro is all over the tariff stuff. But like, to that point in that time interview, his quote was, "I love the concept of a millionaire tax hike, but it, quote, may not be acceptable to the public." So like, that's the point is that that's how detached from reality he is. He's how he used to be able to be a very effective crowd surfer, but since he lost the election, he has had no tether to any sane society, to any sense of like liberal New York, even like elites, right? And he's been holed up in Mar-a-Lago in OANNville. He doesn't even understand that, like, I know they're not going to do this millionaire tax hike, but you should know that that's a good thing for you politically if that's what you care about.
His view of the public is like the billionaires in his cabinet.
Exactly.
Like that's where he's getting his rating from. He's like, well, they probably won't like it, so we're going to avoid it. I mean, one of the things that I've been thinking about is all of these people are so brain poisoned. They're so like online brain poisoned. And I think one of the qualities of having that particular illness is that everything becomes sort of unreal to you, so like the massive carnage that you are perpetrating on the global economy and small businesses and on workers and what it's going to do to prices. Like it feels like nothing is really real, like nothing matters. That's always what people, nothing really matters.
Nihilistic presidency.
Yeah. And so I think it's that. I think also, in Trump's first term, he did some tariffs, much, much, much more limited than what we're talking about here. But there was economists were really concerned about what those tariffs were going to do and the price hikes and what would it mean for farmers, et cetera. And they did have negative impacts. I mean, farmers had to be bailed out under Trump 1.0. But I think in his mind, he's like, well, it didn't come to this catastrophic end that everyone predicted. And so I think he just doesn't, he just thinks he can do anything and that it will never have the consequences that the experts are really predicting. And, this plays into his view of the polls being wrong and those sorts of things. So I do think that plus he's a psychopath, so that doesn't help things. And I think there is just a total disconnect from the actual impacts of his policy. He definitely doesn't care whether or not Republicans win the midterms. I mean, he's not trying to work through Congress. He's doing whatever he wants on his own. So what difference does it make to him whether or not Republicans have control of the House, have control of the Senate? And as I said before, I think you're going to see increasingly authoritarian tactics and police state tactics. And we're already seeing plenty of that, but I think that's going to continue to get ramped up as his popularity slips and there's more and more need for him to crush dissent and assert total control and dominance.
I think just to expand on what you're saying, I think, I wonder if part of what drives him on the tariff front is that Biden maintain those tariffs. And in some places, whether it was through the CHIPS Act or the IRA, expanded on them. And he needs to sort of I'm going to be more than Biden. And then on the flip side, in terms of what we're going to see in terms of authoritarianism, in Trump 1.0, it felt like whenever there was any type of scandal, and there was a ton of scandals in that first term. I wonder if people remember how many people had to resign even by this point. I think there was 3 or 4, 5 resignations.
Reince Priebus barely lasted a month or two.
But the guy from Oklahoma was at the EPA, was already talking about using his there was multiple people who had to be jettisoned. They're not going to jettison anybody. They're basically in for, I think, Hegseth could literally be projecting war plans, on a screen on the Pentagon, and I think he would be fine. But in that iteration of the Trump administration, they immediately went to attacking a black person. It was I can't remember all the different. There was a half a dozen, whether it was, the squad members, whether it was Kaepernick. There were so many. And I think they're going to use immigrants in that same way this time.
Yeah.
And I think they're hoping with that's going to be their elixir, I guess, to get out of, a bad news cycle.
Well,
at least that's Miller's perspective.
He thinks his biggest mistake in the first term was ever listening to anyone about anything. Yeah, that's what in the off season while they were out of office, the whole plan was, okay, whatever guardrails were in place last time, we may need to make damn sure none of those exist this time around. And this is actually a core sort of MAGA movement belief, is that the problem with Trump 1.0 was that you had, John McCain there to give the thumbs down on the healthcare. You had people like Jared Kushner, Mark Milley, or the deep state, or Esper to rein him in when he says, hey, let's shoot protesters in the knees. That is their assessment of what went wrong in Trump 1.0. So they took a very intentional, that's part of what Project 2025 was, a very intentional effort to make sure that whether it's Republicans in Congress, whether it's law firms, whether it's the media, whether it's universities, whether it's the courts, these things are not going to stand in their way this time. And, that's what Schedule F is about as well, making sure you only have loyalist sycophants in place so that this time around, if Trump says, hey, I want to do the Insurrection Act, there's not going to be anyone there to say, here's why that would be really horrible and you shouldn't do it. And, that's what we've seen. You couple that with, of course, the fact that the Supreme Court gave him blanket immunity, more or less. And you have someone who is just completely unhinged, absolute id, and going to go to the most maximalist places he has ever imagined. Just one other note on that. This is a point that Emily Jashinsky, who I work with, made that I thought was astute, which is on the tariffs specifically. If you actually wanted to do a real industrial protectionist policy involving tariffs that has some intelligence, some sort of intellect behind it, you would have brought back Robert Lighthizer. Whether you agree with his ideology or not, this is a guy who's thoughtful, knows what he's talking about, could do something that was actually coherent. But you don't go with Lighthizer. Instead, you go with Howard Lutnick and Peter Navarro and these types Navarro is a complete ideological crank who, by the way, just got out of prison and so is also in this like YOLO burn it all down mode. Lutnick seems to just be a complete idiot. And then you've got Besant there to try to like sane wash the whole enterprise. So I thought that was an interesting indication too of even Lighthizer, because he had some level of intellectual independence, even though he was aligned with the stated MAGA protectionist goals, even he couldn't be brought into this administration.
I mean, that's interesting. I think, again, I think you're right. The number one factor to get hired was how much resistance are you going to put up? Or, am I going to be, are there going to be leaks about this? Which is why we're not seeing those same leaks this time, because they're all just loyalty was just their number one, credential that they needed to get the job. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.